she's trying to log on. I don't want to distract her from that.
Yeah.
Okay, now we're recording. We're not live yet, but this recording will post to the live event site as soon as the session is over. About to open the room.
Andre, are you doing a brief introduction?
I'm doing an introduction, and I'll do the Q&A with them and help them monitor the chat.
Okay. You don't need me on the intro, do you?
Unless you want to be here. I'm just going to introduce each of the speakers and do a little bit of housekeeping for first thing in the day.
Okay, I'm going to log off in a minute then and watch.
All right, any housekeeping you want me to?
Just the Chatham House rules for the 2 today, that's it.
All right, and everyone got an email on that too, so we'll be good.
Yeah, and letting them know that the movie Maxima is open all day, but it closes when Q&A starts.
Okay.
Great, I'm excited for this one. We'll see you guys.
Thank you.
All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and start the session, okay? Welcome to day 2 of the Chicago Responsible Jewelry Conference. We're so excited to have you back again today. If you joined us for our sessions yesterday, we had a really fabulous day getting to know the responsible gem dealers and buying some gemstones, of course. If you didn't get to see those sessions, they are all available live on the event site. So just go click the links, but not now because we have a great session for you to watch right now. Also about the event site, some of you get concerned when you don't see the email about your link. Don't let that bother you. On the event site, as long as you're logged in, you can click on any session, and is within 10 minutes of the session start time, you'll be able to join it live. So stay on that site all day long. It will alert you on your screen when a session is beginning, and you can join the sessions from there. Just a little bit more housekeeping, and then we'll get into this session. The movie Maxima is available for a group screening tonight. It is available all day as well. And in fact, at the group session, we can only have 100 attendees. That's the limitation. But there are 500 of us in this event. So we encourage people who want to watch the movie to try to grab it at some point during the day today, because once we open for the question and answer session this evening, the movie will no longer be available to us. So please do watch Maxima. Also, we have 2 sessions today that are going to be held under the Chatham House rule, which means that we are not recording those. So if you want the content from the Mercury panel or from the Diamonds panel, then it will be very important that you watch those sessions live. So I think that's all my housekeeping. So with that, I'd like to get to introducing our next session, which is supporting the SDGs through jewelry. And we have a group that has put together a report that is exciting and illuminating and expands on Susan's idea of using the SDGs not conceptually, but as a language. And this presentation really expands on that in some profound ways. So I am so excited to bring this or introduce this group to you. I'm going to do the introductions now, and then they'll all be speaking in turn. So first we have Jorden de Haan and James McQuilken. Just raise your hands, guys, so that they know which one. Oh, one at a time. Jorden. Jorden and James are both program officers and ASM experts at Pact in the Mines to Market program. They were also supposed to be joined by Kirsten Dales today. She's an independent senior consultant and industrial ecologist that specializes in ASM, and she participated in this report. But she is not feeling well, and she's on her way to the doctor. So we're benefiting from all her work today, but we don't get to see her face, I'm afraid. So the 3 of them together wrote this publication on mapping the ASMs to the SDGs, and that's what they're sharing. We will also be joined by Emily Achor, but she's not in the session yet. We think she's probably having some technical difficulties, so she may be popping in at any point. Emily is a geologist and an ASM expert. She's most recently undertaken research of the impacts of COVID-19 on ASM gemstone communities in Nigeria. And she did this in partnership with Delve, which is a platform for ASM data. As you know, we need the data to get insight on the problems so we can solve them. And then we also have Professor Mutemeri. There she is. He will be sharing some of her expert viewpoint on mobilizing these SDGs for artisanal miners. So that is our panel. And I'm going to hand it over to you guys now, and I'll help you out with any questions that pop up along the way.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for that introduction. And hi to all participants. Greetings from Kisumu, Western Kenya. I think that most of you tuning in today into this session probably know our colleague Christina Villegas, who runs Pact's Moyo Gems program, and who has also been speaking on the CRC-JC several times now. But for the rest of us, this is actually the first time to speak on this conference. So first, I just want to thank you, Andrea, and also Susan Wheeler and all other conference organizers for having us here today. And so I'm not sure if you know, but many of the minerals that go into our jewelry, including gold, diamonds, and especially gemstones, actually come from artisanal and small-scale mines, which are right at the intersection of sustainable development issues. So by producing or trading jewelry, we indirectly affect the SDGs, both positively and negatively. Now, to help us better understand these complex ASM-SDG interlinkages, Kirsten, James, and myself have teamed up with Professor Salim Ali from the University of Delaware to produce the ASM-SDG policy assessment, which we are presenting to you now. So, yes.
Okay.
So, to give you a glimpse of what we're going to discuss in this presentation, here's a brief overview of some of our key findings, illustrated in two ASM-SDG wheels. As we can see on the wheel on the left side, even in its largely informal state, ASM contributes positively to almost all 17 SDGs, but also has negative impacts on most of them. Moreover, as will become evident in the next 50 minutes or so, we will see that formalization has a great potential in harnessing ASM's relationship with the SDGs, by mitigating ASM's negative impacts and by amplifying ASM's positive impacts on the SDGs. However, naturally, this all depends on the way that formalization is approached. So therefore, maybe before going into our findings, I'd like to briefly discuss with you our conceptualization of the formalization process as we have used it in this assessment. So in short, in our assessment, we define formalization as essentially a process of capacity building to enable compliance with national regulations and ultimately to facilitate access to the formal market. In our conceptualization, we built on the key components of the formalization process as they have been introduced in the UNITAR and UN Environment Formalization Handbook. And you can see these key components illustrated on the screen here. In short, these components range from geoprospecting and allocating land to organizing the wider mineral supply chain and also facilitating access to finance and assistance, among other things. Now let's go to our findings. Because many of the SDGs are interrelated, we have organized our findings into 7 SDG clusters. I will now first discuss the cluster on economic development, and then I will then pass the floor to James to discuss other clusters. In the cluster of economic development, we discussed 3 different SDGs. This includes SDG 1 on poverty reduction, SDG 8 on decent work and economic growth, and SDG 12 on responsible consumption and production. Let us first consider ASM in its largely informal state in its relation to economic development. Starting with SDG 1, ASM is critical for enabling direct livelihoods for more than 42 million people living in impoverished areas. And in view of the sector's economic spillover effects in rural economies, it provides indirect livelihoods for many more people. The sector is thus critical for poverty alleviation. Regarding SDG 8, the sector sparks local economic growth, and it also provides employment for otherwise unemployed youth. However, at the same time, the sector is also associated with poor labor rights and poor occupational health and safety conditions. And one could just pose the question to what extent this employment really concerns decent work. Regarding SDG 12, impacts are mainly negative. For example, ASM generally uses inefficient mineral processing methods, and it also pollutes the environment with hazardous chemicals such as mercury and cyanide. Turning now to formalization. Formalization can really help to enhance ASM's impacts on economic development outcomes in a positive manner. For example, ASM formalization can help to prevent miners from getting stuck in a so-called poverty cycle by facilitating equal rights to land, mineral resources, technology, finance, and formal markets. Moreover, formalization can help to increase government revenue, for example, through the collection of license fees, taxes, and royalties. It can reduce informal labor and reduce child labor, and it can also facilitate the establishment of mining associations, thereby improving representation and, by extension, decent work. Finally, formalization can really help to facilitate miners in adopting better mining practices, which then in turn can increase more responsible and sustainable mineral production. Now let's take an example to illustrate some of these formalization impacts. I think that many of you are probably familiar with Pact's Moyo Gems project, which was also discussed by our partners in the Gems Boutique yesterday. And what you see on this picture here is Raheli, which is a woman, a Maasai woman in Tanzania's Umba Valley, who is mining color gemstones. And in Tanzania's Umba Valley, the Maasai, and especially Maasai ladies, are largely marginalized. The Moyo Gems project is helping women such as Raheli, but also other women joining mining color gemstones such as rubies, sapphires, and garnets to work more safely, to mine better, and also to access equitable and fair markets for fair trade. So, for example, the Moyo Gems project is helping Raheli and other women to connect them with local brokers and exporters in Tanzania who are currently exporting their gemstones to international buyers based in the US and the UK. So this is just a quick example just to illustrate some of the impacts that formalization can have on economic development, but besides economic development, also on gender equality. And speaking of gender equality, I will now pass the floor to James McQuilken to discuss the economic cluster, the SDG cluster of social development, including SDG 5 on gender equality. Over to you, James.
Thank you very much, Jordan. Yes, so if we could go to the next slide. Perfect. Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone from London. So yes, in terms of social development, which, as Jordan said, is the second cluster that we analysed in the report. Well, really, as I'm sure most of us are aware, social development in small-scale mining is really about improving the well-being of every individual in order to reach their full development potential. And so in terms of some of the positive contributions of ASM towards social development, we highlight in the report points such as the ability for small-scale mining to actually fund education, and that includes even university level, and also obviously the children of miners themselves. Also, there's the on-the-job learning through actually undertaking mining and all the different activities that are involved, not just directly in mining, but related to it. So there's the ability to learn and develop skills that could be useful in other trades. This in turn, in terms of social development, also helps increase resilience in small-scale mining in communities by having multiple income streams, for example, through mining that can withstand different economic and social shocks. Small-scale mining can also be a vehicle for women's empowerment, especially when women become mine owners or are able to take on more advanced roles within the mining sector and things like this. And importantly as well, artisanal small-scale mining, through its ability to address poverty and poverty alleviation, really can help increase incomes for the bottom 40% of some of the most disadvantaged and marginalized in our society. However, of course, ASM does have some negative impacts in this cluster on social development. In some cases, children, are drawn to mining, and unfortunately, this can result in dropouts from school. While I said women can own mines, actually, in ASM, it's quite rare, and to be honest, most of them tend to be confined to secondary roles. There's also unequal power relations that can manifest as well, and various kind of forms of exploitation and exclusion. So when we considered what formalization could help in terms of social development, which is shown on the next slide, well, first of all, through formalization programs, we can help reduce child labor. We can actually help to support apprenticeships more formally through scholarships, specifically targeted ASM sectors such as graduates from universities, but also from colleges. Also, it can help ASM through formalization can enhance women's participation and their access to resources, and again through their involvement in ASM, also enhance social, economic, and political inclusion. But of course, formalization, unless it's undertaken properly, does not equal everyone. So it's important that through these programs we ensure that women are really involved and at the centre, so as not to perpetuate inequalities, and also that we take a real bottom-up approach, again, to ensure that we're not coming from the top down and excluding certain groups. So we move to the third cluster that we look at in the report, and the third cluster focuses on environmental stewardship. And really, actually, Kirsten wrote a lot of this because this is really her area. But just to cover it briefly, some of the positive impacts we see in terms of environmental stewardship are that, so for example, we find that, for example, the cobalt, by the year 2050, there's a need for about a 500% increase in cobalt and other minerals that are actually vital to the production of renewable energy, such as wind turbines, such as solar PV cells, etc. So in that way, miners are contributing to the global production of some of these critical materials that are needed for our transition to a low carbon economy. And also, we find that through environmental stewardship, some miners are taking care of their land. However, perhaps the most obvious set of negative influences from ASM and that have really attracted the most attention, I think, that get the most bad press, are the impacts of ASM on the environment, and this includes deforestation, environmental degradation, biodiversity loss, both kind of on land and marine, and also even the and also we find mining can occur in protected areas, and also in terms of energy production, a lot of the fuels used for mining, such as to power generators, are diesel powered, and they cut out, or burning charcoal that's used to smelt gold at the local level. So there are a lot of dirty sources of energy for ASM. But if we turn to some of the formalization and how this can help with environmental stewardship, well, it can help with advancing climate mitigation strategies for the ASM sector by having a more holistic approach and planning land use in a more holistic way for multiple different uses that are all kind of in a more of a closed network. As I mentioned, the minerals themselves are helping transition to a low carbon economy, and formalization as well can enhance monitoring and enforcement of environmental reclamation and stewardship. And finally, by having ownership of land, legal ownership and tenure to lands, long term, it can really incentivize miners to invest and protect the environment as well. So really, environmental stewardship, we find in the report, we say, comes down to actual land use and land use planning and that integrated approach. So now moving on to the fourth cluster, which was nutrition and healthy lives. Well, in terms of the positive impacts, perhaps the most significant is the way that ASM interlocks with other rural livelihoods, and in particular agriculture. And this interlocking between the two livelihoods increases resilience by providing multiple income streams. Also, the higher returns, from mining can be used to purchase fertilizers, seeds, and farming equipment. Again, helping to secure food production and enhancing nutrition. Also, the presence of miners in communities can create greater demand in local markets, so farmers can command a better price. However, this can also actually make food more expensive. That's one of the negative impacts as well, which can undermine nutrition of local community. Some other negative impacts as well, and again, kind of related to the environmental side of things, but obviously farmland and water body destruction is something that's very visible oftentimes in some mining communities. Again, it can distort markets, like I said, and health and safety too. So, I mean, all mining is inherently dangerous, but particularly for ASM, which has received little support in this area, largely informal, and also due to the labor-intensive methods of bending, twisting, carrying heavy loads, and those lack of formal safety procedures, does negatively impact long-term health outcomes. And in fact, this picture here is one I took on the left here of some miners in Ghana, some artisanal diamond miners, and they're actually diving underwater, holding their breath into this murky water, for traveling with the current downstream for about 10 seconds with a metal bucket, and then coming up, having held their breath, with a bucket of gravel that's then sieved in these drums here, all for some very small diamonds that are more bought quality. So they're not gemstone quality from Ghana really, mainly industrial, and they sell some of these, even just for about 5 cedis, which I think when I was there a few years back was a couple of pounds or a couple of dollars. So that just really shows you the kind of health and safety issues, and also being in that water all day, jigging the diamonds, can lead to infectious diseases and things like this. So yeah, we talk about some of this in the book as well. Sorry, the publication. So how does formalization help? Well, through that formalization, one of the main things is to enhance those positive synergies between the different livelihoods. Things like reclamation, helping to reduce health and safety risks, and also improving access for miners. Again, many of them are informal. Many communities therefore lack access to health services. So actually being able to reach communities with health services is really important to enhance their long-term health outcomes. So the final cluster that we looked at in the report that I will speak to is on clean energy, infrastructure, and sustainable cities, which should be appearing on the next slide. And so in this one of the positive impacts we examined in the policy assessment is that ASM is, anecdotally at least, much less energy intensive than large-scale mining operations. But as we're quite clear, and as I mentioned before, ASM of course does use lots of energy, and many of it is in dirty forms currently. Some additional positive impacts really are the way in which ASM, not just gemstones, but also provides construction materials such as clays and sands, and these can be used to build roads and schools and health centres locally. The sector as well can, in this way, help reduce urbanisation and migration too, as people are kept in some of the rural areas, as there's jobs there and there's incomes and there's communities, rather than travelling to the cities in search of work. So in this way, ASM has positive impacts on clean energy, infrastructure, and sustainable cities. However, some of the poor infrastructure we see can relate to some of the housing, especially in rush scenarios, makeshift camps and things like this, when we see miners rushing to new gemstone or gold finds in places like Madagascar. But turning to some of the formalization, or ways in which rather formalization can help this cluster. Well, first of all, by formalizing, there's an ability for the government to then take formal tax and revenues, which can be used to invest in big infrastructure projects. And also, of course, the materials themselves coming from small-scale miners can be used to build that infrastructure. There's innovation as well in terms of processing and more sustainable processing through formalization that can be encouraged, and knowledge transfer. And finally, as I mentioned before around land, this point about actually having increased security of tenure, having a license, that very thing of being a legitimate miner can then enable miners and communities to invest in their mines to protect their communities for longer term development. So that was a brief overview from me, and back to Jorden now for the remainder of the overview of the policy assessment. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, James. And let's turn to our sixth cluster, which is on peace, justice, and governance. As we can see on this map here, which overlays ASM workforce estimates with the Fragile States Index, ASM thrives in areas that have been affected by conflict and which are characterized by poor governance. SDG 16 is one of the most challenging SDGs, which includes 3 key domains of peace, justice, and inclusive societies. And the artisanal small-scale mining sector is most well known for being negatively affected or negatively correlated with these issues. For example, ASM is associated with organized crime. It is known for financing armed conflict and terrorism. It is associated with human rights abuses, bribery, corruption, and so on. And this goes especially for the artisanal gemstone mining sector, which has very little transparency in price setting, and thereby enables international buyers to underpay local miners and local brokers who may not know what is the exact value of their gemstones. However, at the same time, even in its informal state, ASM also has positive impacts on these domains. For example, the ASM sector provides marginalized youth and ex-combatants with a viable alternative to joining armed and criminal networks. And moreover, the sector is well known to often serve as a social safety net in times of crisis. But inclusive and human rights-based approach to formalization can really help to unlock ASM's full potential in supporting long-term peace-building and state-building processes. For example, as we see with Pact's ITSCI program in the African Great Lakes region of Africa, supply chain due diligence mechanisms can help to de-link ASM from armed conflict and human rights abuses. Moreover, by professionalizing and legitimizing marginalized livelihoods, formalization can provide women and young men with more meaningful prospects for the future, and thereby help to address some of the root causes of the outbreaks of violent conflict. Then, as a final cluster of analysis, ASM can forge partnerships for the goals, as encapsulated in SDG 17. As one can tell, probably from the diverse range of participants that are attending the CRJC and also this session, ASM in the mining sector really brings together stakeholders from the public sector, from the private sector, and from civil society. Moreover, by engaging private partners, such as jewelers, large-scale mining companies, and refiners, ASM can help to diversify the global sources of development assistance. And building on this, formalization can really harness this potential of ASM by de-risking the ASM sector, thereby improving the investment climate for both public and private partners. So as such, ASM, and especially ASM formalization, can revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. So to conclude, even in its informal state, ASM contributes positively to almost all 17 SDGs, but it also has negative impacts on most of them. However, from transitioning from an informal to a formal sector and moving from the wheel on the left side of the screen to the one on the right side of the screen, together we can unlock the sector's full development potential. Indeed, as we have seen, depending on the way it is approached, formalization can help to mitigate many of the sector's negative impacts, and it can help to amplify many of the sector's positive impacts on the SDGs. However, this really depends on the way that formalization is approached. In order to achieve the intended benefits on the SDGs, formalization needs to be approached with the intended issues in mind. I think that as we can maybe tell from the session that the section where James was discussing about, when he was speaking about health comms, he says in order to achieve certain health comms, you need to adopt a health lens to formalization approaches. Moreover, in order to achieve certain items under environmental stewardship, formalization should be approached from an integrated land use management approach to ensure that really all those potential benefits of ASM on the environment could be established. However, adoption of only one of such perspectives risks not effectively harnessing ASM's relationships with the other SDGs and can in fact result in negative impacts of them. For example, if no gender-based, human rights-based approaches are adopted, formalization risks leaving women behind or leaving other disadvantaged minors behind in the formalization process. So therefore, in order to leverage all the identified linkages, ASM formalization needs to be planned and implemented in an inclusive and comprehensive manner with all 17 SDGs in mind. But how can we go about this? In the final part of the policy assessments, we provide detailed recommendations to policymakers at the national levels, to private partners, and to the global community at large. In short, we provide guidance on developing SDG-sensitive formalization strategies and for integrating ASM in national, regional, and global development frameworks. I think that as of most importance of our recommendations to the jewelry sector is really to engage constructively with ASM communities and to buy their minerals for your jewelry. And in doing so, try to understand where the minerals come from, under which circumstances they have been produced, how this all links to the 17 SDGs, and what can be done to improve the overall or the net impacts on those SDGs. Then finally, based on this understanding, we can use ASM to inform our business strategies as a pathway to corporate sustainability, and in that way, support the SDGs through our jewelry. And with that, I thank you for your kind attention.
Are we moving into Emily's portion of the presentation now?
Yeah. Yes, this was the presentation on the ASM-SDG policy assessment.
Okay. So now Emily has been asked to reflect on what the SDGs mean in the context of artisanal and gold mining in Nigeria. So thanks for joining us, Emily. I'm glad you got into the session. Emily, can you hear us okay?
Thank you so much, Andre.
You're quite welcome.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can. There's a bit of a latency on the line, so there's a delay between when you
can, okay, what? Oh, sorry about that.
That's okay. You go ahead. It's all yours.
Okay, I can go on and. Okay, thank you. What do the SDG means to artisanal mining in Nigeria? On my slide, you will find, thank you for this opportunity, Andre. And you will find that I have 4 key SDG that resonates to me as an artisanal consultant, and which is inclusivity and environmental reclamation and clean water and energy. And when I talk about inclusivity, I talk about economic empowerment also as community needs assessment and livelihood, which is very important that we see that SDG has a lot to contribute to the ASM in Nigeria. And if you see my slide, I have a slide from gold mine in Shakwata in Boso local government in Niger State, and also gemstones mine from Ibadan in Oyo State, and also from Nasarawa in Nigeria, both states, where gemstones are predominantly found in those areas. And these are the finish from the start to finish product, which is being done by one of our dwellers, Mina Stones, the jewelry. So we also have made in Nigerian jewelry. So what do we think that SDG is going to contribute to the ASM sector, which is transfer of knowledge, technology in the polishing and cutting and polishing of gemstones, and also in making of jewelry. Also sustain awareness of practitioners of community needs and enduring livelihood. Because most of the time, if we can see through the slides, you see the miners where they do the lotto pits and all of that, the environment is being exposed. And in the process for ASM, mercury is being used to mine, to amalgamate gold from their process. And in this, when they dispose this thing, they throw it just around in the environment, which seep down into the water ground, and the water is already contaminated. So, and we all know that for sure, communities also are endangered when they do not have potable water, and that will also affect the kind of energy that is being distributed there in such community. Then we also talk about develop capacity of artisans and the potentials of post-mining economy activities with best practices and mining methods. In land reclamation, we know that can be a man-made lake for agriculture or other kind of activities to be used, for the community to live well. Develop awareness of importance of green and clean energy, environmental sustainability. These are the points that I think that SDG could contribute to ASM in Nigeria. And of course, value addition. We all have, in Nigeria recently, we have conferences where we need to talk about the gold mined in Nigeria, and also gemstones mined in Nigeria. It's been recorded that most of the time they do not have records of this gemstones being mined. It's all out there. And that is why we have events, a marketplace like the African Gold West Africa Conference, which also held, even in this COVID-19, it's held. And the African Gems and Jewelry, it has come to stay, and it's been a very fantastic conference and exhibition where other countries are also coming. GIA was also in participant of the one that was held last year. And we also have the Mineral Gem and Jewelry exhibition, Mineral Buying Center. So these are platforms where we showcase gemstones and jewelry made from Nigeria. And that piece you see on the slide is also from a jeweler from Nigeria. So we have made in Nigeria jewelry, where we try to also promote our kind of culture and tradition through the jewelries that we produce. So I think there's a lot of partnership that can be held. Recently, the government is trying to modernize the marketplace, where in Oyo State, in Ibadan, where these two places, Plateau State and Jos, are hubs where gemstones are being sold. So they want to make it a one-stop shop where you come in, you can transact, you can get everything you want and leave and pay your royalty as what is up to you. This is where I will have to stop. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Emily. And now Professor Nellie Mutemeri is going to address how the SDGs can be used to support interventions across the jewelry supply chain and benefit artisanal miners in their communities.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Andrea and Susan and everyone in the conference, for giving me an opportunity to share my thoughts on how I think SDGs can be used to support interventions across the jewelry supply chain, particularly to benefit artisanal miners and the communities in which they reside. In my work as a development practitioner, with my consultancy, Mood Consult, as well as my work as an academic at Wits University in the School of Mining Engineering. We do a lot of work around generating an evidence base to support how policies are done for the sector, knowledge transfer, technology transfer, responsible practice, and such like. And in all this work, one comes across the issues of mineral supply chains in the sector all the time. And this is largely due to the how ASM challenges can be addressed so that the sector can actually contribute to positive developmental outcomes. I'd like to start my intervention just by telling a little story of artisanal gold woman miner from East Africa. She's come to be my friend over the years. Her name is Eunice. Eunice had been doing quite well in the last 12 months. And then about this time last year, her mine was flooded. They had unseasonably high rainfall in the part of East Africa where she lives. And while she's waiting to get resources, whatever savings she had so that she can dewater her mine and start mining again, the COVID pandemic happened. She could not even get to the mine site to be able to do anything at all. And of course, with the pandemic restrictions, they also restricted other livelihood alternatives. Her savings eventually ran out. And up until now, she actually can't restart her mine. I speak to Eunice on an ongoing basis, but unfortunately, apart from just commiserating with her, there's actually very little I can do for her, and it really breaks my heart. And the reason I'm telling the story is because Eunice is an actor in the jewelry supply chain, and she operates under the most adverse of conditions. She's vulnerable to things like climate change, which I think is what happened with the flooding of her mine. And even more vulnerable to pandemics like the COVID pandemic. She's one of millions of artisanal miners who are in the jewelry supply chain in and around Africa that have been affected and continue to be affected in this way. And apart from being an actor in the supply chain, I think one of the things that is well demonstrated is that ASM is an important source of livelihoods for the rural poor, whether it's in Africa or in many different countries. And I think the work that Kirsten demonstrates this very well. And it also demonstrates that if we are thinking about achieving or attaining any meaningful advancement on the SDGs, if we don't take ASM into account, I think we can just forget about attaining them. And people like Eunice and around in Africa and other parts of the world have an important role to play. As you can see from my illustration, they are active in all these different parts of the value chain. And they provide the feedstocks that go into jewelry. And all these activities that they get involved in, from exploration, that is finding their own little deposit, extracting through mining, processing it, value adding. Some of the processing which Emily mentioned includes use of mercury, which is bad for the health. All that is so that they can produce the raw materials that can go into the jewelry supply chain. And these activities have impacts. And some of those impacts, like pointed out in the presentation by James and Jorden, have environmental impacts, health impacts, safety impacts, socioeconomic impacts, and having a direct impact on how SDGs can actually be attained. And I try in a very cursory sense to map some of that in terms of the impacts around which SDGs might be more relevant. But in my opinion, all SDGs are actually unattainable unless the world reckons with the ASM sector. So what can we do about it? I think you as actors in the jewelry supply chain, what I see, there's a lot of things that we can do. But I think for me, the thing that really, really makes a difference so that SDGs can have interventions that support people like Eunice and the community she comes from. And I think is that it's important for us to have a systematic approach that actually leads to systemic change. And I'm saying this with the full understanding that there are many well-developed, sophisticated, responsible supply chain interventions out there, and they're all doing very well. But I think that unless those interventions are clearly embedded in national and regional frameworks, I think they will not have the kind of lasting change that is desired by the sustainable development goals. In Africa, for example, we have the Africa Mining Vision, which exhorts a transparent, equitable, and optimal exploitation of mineral resources. And for the ASM sector specifically, it talks to taking advantage or harnessing the potential of the ASM sector to stimulate local entrepreneurship. I think a lot of the interventions that I see that are being showcased in your conference are supporting that. I think all I can add is that if they can be embedded in the frameworks that exist in those countries where you're operating, I think they will lead to really exciting change and lasting change that can last beyond ourselves in terms of positive impacts in addressing negative impacts. I think I would like to end my intervention there. Thank you very much.
So do you have any more? Do you want to go to another slide, or do you want to go straight to Q&A?
Straight to the Q&A. Yeah, that is our summary, collective summary of the SDGs and ASM, and we'd love. I see some questions on the chat. We'd love to hear some and engage more of discussion with the time we have left.
There are definitely questions in the chat, and we have a hard stop because this is technology driven in 6 minutes, but we did activate live chat on the event site for this session. So if people want to go then to the event site and chat some more, we can keep the conversation going. Your colleague was raising questions, Christina, early in the session. She wanted to know, do foundations such as Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation focus on ASM and SDG goals?
I from the top of my head, I'll let others speak. I honestly don't know, and I think maybe I know they do a lot of work in health, right? And I think this is where perhaps the SDGs could be useful. So where there's traditional donors out there, some that know about ASM, but there's a lot that don't, and they don't really see how the ASM sector maps across the 17 SDGs, as all of us have kind of explained. So when it comes to someone like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who obviously have a lot of capital and a lot of interest on the health side of things, well, actually, ASM communities and miners are a real hidden population, and also with a lot of them being informal as well, it's very hard to legitimately engage with them because, you know, government or formal actors would be seen and, you know, to supposedly engage with some kind of informal or, let's say, illegal activity. I prefer the word informal for multiple reasons. So I think, in short, perhaps they don't, but they should, and perhaps using the SDGs and in the policy assessment, you know, the evidence is out there. We're just bringing together the voice that's been built over many years in the evidence, you know, to say that if we use the SDGs, if we map them to global frameworks, it can help to, you know, generate greater interest and funding to address some of these issues for sustainable development.
Oh, go ahead, Jordan.
Sorry, yeah, I just want to quickly jump in just to add to what James just said. I think that there's really increased momentum for the SDGs, the UN, and I've previously worked with the UN, so I have some inside information. The UN has just launched the SDG Decade of Action because there are 10 years left for achieving Agenda 2030. And of course, as Nellie already indicated, it is not going to be achieved, but nonetheless, SDG action is still really critical for all of us. I think that traditionally it's been very much, the SDGs have been pushed by the UN and governments being the main counterparts they work with. But the UN is also increasingly engaging the private sector, also for engaging in development assistance. And I think that many more and more mining companies and jewelers and more private partners are now working towards the SDGs. So although perhaps the progress is not yet as far as we would like to see it, I think there's really a great momentum and I think that more and more, both traditional and let's say more modern or private donors are now realizing that the SDGs are critical for reporting on their own corporate social responsibility. So I do think that it is a critical area that is growing.
Christina is asking if she can have permission to use the recommendation slide on her website. She's pointing out that a lot of customers think all mining is all negative and that it's hard to communicate why it's important to buy from ASMs.
Please do.
Okay, do you guys mind if I just post the slide presentation in the session links?
No, perhaps if you could post a PDF form of this presentation, we'd be very happy to make it available to anyone interested to see the presentation.
Wonderful, thank you. That's a real gift to the audience. Then, looking for other questions here. Lots of compliments and gratitude in the comments, but I'm looking for the questions.
While you're looking, Andrea, I can just comment on the issue of donors funding ASM. I think the point that I was making in my intervention about supporting activities that are embedded in the national and regional frameworks, I think one finds that a lot of these donors are supporting government programs. So if you were to support interventions that are embedded or rather within the framework of a national policy or a national strategy, you'll find that there are a lot of donors. They may not succinctly say we are for ASM, but if they're supporting the development of an ASM policy, which supports formalization, then indeed they are supporting ASM. They may not support a grassroots intervention, but you might find that those level of Bill Gates, those kind of big funders are still supporting the sector, but more in terms of national or regional frameworks.
Okay.
Okay, if I could say something, that's also very important that policies are being supported, but also access to market for dwellers, local dwellers who are ASM in the sector. I think that will also help, where, you know, women, men are given the same opportunity to go, like this conference. If it was physical, people have access to come display what they do. And I think that will be the interchange of cultural, because juries also speak about cultures, and I think that will also help.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And it kind of segues into a question from Cristina Vieja, which is, what are the questions that ethical makers should be asking of their suppliers? Because we have a tendency to just ask, is this responsibly sourced? But do you have any recommendations? Could we turn this presentation into a set of questions people could be asking so they could be more pointed?
Yeah, it's a really good question. What kind of questions to ask? I think even taking a step back, it's maybe also being your expectations perhaps as well. So there's the expectation, I guess, if you're going to ask where it's from, who it's from, that someone would know that immediately. And I know a lot of people on as part of this conference are working to do just that. But the reality is I don't think we don't have all those answers yet. So I think expectations should be that if there is a jeweler or if there is a maker, you know, who is asking some of those questions, is to encourage them to keep asking them, but also be aware that if the answer comes back as I don't know, then being prepared to help them and not kind of necessarily walk away, but you know, help them in that journey. I think collectively, all of us now in this ASM kind of world and community, and I only joined like 5-10 years ago, but people have been doing this for 20-30 years as part of their career. Nellie's been there, you know, doing this work for a long time. So I think we have a collective responsibility to bang the ASM drum, and over time, you know, things will gradually improve. So yeah, perhaps asking the questions. I know I didn't answer the question, but asking questions, but being prepared if the answer isn't quite what you heard, not to disengage, but continue engaging.
The question.
Sorry.
Jordan, the system's going to cut us off in about 30 seconds because the next step will get queued up. So go to the chat. Everybody go to the chat and discuss it there. And I want to thank all of you for your phenomenal work and for sharing that work with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Susan. Thank you for the opportunity. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you so much, Andre, for the opportunity. Thank you very much.